an Ebony magazine and look and just see the most fabulous photograph of Audrey Smaltz hanging off the back of the fire truck in the fireman's boots and the cute bathing suit just looking over her shoulder and just think, oh, here it is, you know, like here it is. So how does this movement happen? You know, she's Miss New York Transit in 1954. In 1854, her ancestors are having an absolute opposite experience in this exact same country. And then 100 years later, she is living a very different kind of life. And you know, I went to interview Audrey Smaltz. She's a fascinating woman, but you know, she worked on the stock exchange. You know, she flew across to Paris with Mrs. Johnson, where she found these couture gowns and would bring them back, and then they would raise money for the historical black universities and colleges. So, but she's just doing just pure sort of fabulousness. And she grew up in Harlem, you know, but she grew up in what other people would consider to be the products. She grew up in Harlem, and she grew up in what other people would consider to be the projects. But she said, you know, we didn't know we were poor. We had a library in the basement. We had art by black artists on the wall. There's a kind of pride and self-sufficiency, and the parents from the projects got together and taught their children history, and it was in segregated America, so that they had black teachers who taught them black history, and which I always find a really fascinating thing. You know, what happens when segregation ends? What happens to the black children who go into the majority white schools? What they're getting a different kind of knowledge, and it's knowledge that's not connected to their history and culture. But yeah, she was an artist. Part of the reason she won Miss New York Transit is because she had this big booklet of art that she showed to the judges. But I loved the photo, and I loved Ebony, and that photographer was well known to her. When I look at his work, he also took the very famous photograph of Dr. King looking down the long, what do you call that pool?
Yeah, at
in Washington, D.C. Looking towards the Washington Monument, and when he's delivering his I Have a Dream speech. So he's a really important photographer, but he catches this fun moment in Audrey Smaltz's life. And I talked to her about it, and she said, my mother hated that photograph. And I love the idea that she's actually from this, you know, school. She goes to finishing school, and you know, she's this bright woman, but she's doing this kind of cheesecake picture. The reason I loved it so much is because I haven't seen black women framed in this way. So I'd seen a lot of those, you know, like a Betty Page, but I hadn't seen a black woman in this kind of like wholesome, sexy, knowing setup, cheeky way before. So I just was really drawn. Who is this? I was really drawn to that particular photograph. And then I also liked the photograph because I'd seen lots of images like that in the 90s when I was in my indie band, like a sort of riot girl band, where they would reposition these kind of 50s images to put this 90s feminist spin on them. You know, like it was glamorous and fun, but it was also empowered, and that there's this mixture of sort of power and sexuality, and you know, inviting people to come and rock out at 9 o'clock at the bar down the street or whatever. So I think that's why New York Transit Queen came out the way that it did. That I just kind of imagined her as this kind of rebel girl, hellraiser, and then when I get to know her, I was like, oh yeah, this is her. You know, you could see that in that photograph, that she had this kind of fun, daring do kind of personality.
Totally. And there's, you know, Riot Girl is exactly, I was like, here we are in this moment of like, of celebrating, or like, you know, the track itself is like such a track that's about like, fuck all these other, you know, like it's like, so it feels so like, you know, there might be these relentless attempts to over-sexualize and objectify black women, and yet like coming from the underground or something, there's this like, we see this kind of, we see what you're doing, right? We see this kind of rebellious spirit, this kind of badass heroine that we're, you know, we're seeing that that person exists maybe not outside of, but like totally like is self-aware
Yeah, yeah.
of how to speak back to these, you know, systems. And it felt like such a kind of, you know, anthem for for this kind of like heroine, you know,
Yeah.
that we all know in some way or
We all
another.
know her, and then we all sort of, I always felt like we all know and we all sort of want to be her. And that's how I
Totally.
felt when I was playing the song, and, you know, even just like, we just recorded the video for it in New York, and yeah, just feeling, it was only seeing like all these punk kids like jumping up and down. I was like, oh yeah, this is really like a totally punk song, and
Yeah.
and I loved it. You know, it's like I'm playing guitar and most of the bass on there, and our drummer is just like smashing it, and I would like to have moments like that. I think it's really important to just be in all yourselves, whatever that is, and not just have to pick an area and stay in it, because that part feels disingenuous to me. That part feels inauthentic to me. I want to just be able to like have all the colours.